Hey guys, how's it going? Jam here, and welcome to another episode of the Track Build Battles series. As the title suggests, this episode we're going to be using a couple of cars that I've got from the Speciality dealer. First up is this Nissan Skyline Nismo version of the R33 GTR. This is the first episode in a little bit of a while. I've had quite a bit of a break. I've been quite busy, I've also been quite lazy, and I was kind of hoping that Forza would bring out a patch or an update or something to maybe sort out the replays a little bit. As you probably know, in previous episodes I've had issues with the sound of the engines, or any sound at all really, and also as on cue there's a couple of graphical glitches into this circuit in particular that I was kind of hoping would be fixed, but alas, that is not the case. So anyway, let's move on to talk about this very nice sounding and nice looking car. I'm quite a big fan of the Skyline. The R34 was one of my first cars that I really sort of fell in love with. I think it's quite true of a lot of people my age, you know, the likes of the Fast and Furious films with Paul Walker's in his Skylines. Probably had quite a bit of influence to that. And yeah, the Skyline itself is a very nice car. I like the i33, the 34, the 35. I'm just a big Skyline fan, really. Which is weird, because I'm typically more a muscle car fan than an import fan. But, you know, I just like nice cars, and to me this is a nice car. I've obviously got cars I don't like as much as others, but... Anyway, I'm rambling again, so let's start talking about it. Forza stats is always a good place to start, even if they're not very accurate. This car has 6.4 top speed, which is quite low on this series. It's good timing actually. As we go down towards 130R, this car is maxing out at about 140 miles an hour as we turn into the corner, which is really rather slow. I think the average has been about 150, so this is really lacking in the straight line speed department. However, it does sort of make up for it for 6.3 handling, which I think is by far the highest we've had in this series. I could be wrong. I should probably keep a list so I can reference them, but I'm pretty sure that most cars have been at about 5.7, 5.8. To have 6.3 handling and also 6.3 braking to match, this car has got so much grip, and it's got mechanical grip in abundance, but also downforce. It's just so good. I mean, every car is going to spin up its tyres out of this corner here, as you can see. There's just a little bit from this car, but it's got so much downforce. I think I was carrying nearly 125 miles an hour around 130R, which is the first corner on this track. That's absurdly fast compared to other cars in this series. Normally it's in, like, a quick car is approaching 120, average is probably about 110 on most cars on most laps. So to carry about 125 mile an hour around there is phenomenally fast. Where this car does lack, as I said, was initially straight line speed, but also the acceleration to match isn't really quite there. Forza giving this just an 8.2 rating, which I don't think is too bad by this series standards, but it's certainly one of the lower ones. And yeah, that's kind of a bit of an overview of how this car is. It's just, I can't emphasise enough. If I just say it's got insane grip, it handles really well, but it's a bit sluggish on the straights. I don't really need to say anything else. It was pretty well planted because it's got tons of grip. The only thing I'd probably change, I probably could do with upgrading the front tyre widths. When I was messing around building this car, it had a huge amount of downforce, but it was actually lacking on the grip front, so I increased the rear tyre size to give it that sort of push out the corners, and had to take off even more power to create that PI. But in doing so, I created a bit of an imbalance, so the front wasn't quite as responsive as I would have quite have liked. But, you know, it's still got insane amount of grip, so it's got two 6.5s on the fronts and three 1.5s on the rears, so a 0.5 difference, which is quite a lot really. Normally I'd only go for maybe 0.3 at max. But the other stats of this car, just to quickly round up as we finish off this lap, it's got 404 brake horsepower with about 370 foot-pounds of torque and weighing just over 2,900 pounds, which I'd say I haven't recorded an episode in a while, so I'm not really sure. I think that's about average for the series. The weight front, we've had a lot of heavy cars, so that's not too bad, but I think it is a little bit down on power. But anyway, that's the 3 laps of introducing this lovely car. Very orange as well. So we'll move on to the Mercedes C63 AMG Black Series next. So, as I've said, up next is the Mercedes-Benz C63 AMG Black Series. from the second week of the showcased dealer cars. So we've got one from the first week and one from the second week. And obviously the third week is out now, and I was going to use cars from the third week. Only problem being that there wasn't really any that I wanted to use that could fit in this series. The only one would have been the El Camino. But anyway, back onto the Mercedes-Benz, and it's another car that I really rather like. It's kind of funny how that's worked out. I keep picking cars that I like for this series. Anyway, so this car, getting into this car after driving the Nismo was quite a culture shock, really. Everything that the Nismo is, the Black Series isn't. The Skyline was very grippy. This isn't. The Skyline was relatively slow in a straight line. This isn't. The Skyline was nice and composed and easy to drive. This isn't. This is far similar to the first few cars we had in this series. The two, was it the HSVs, the Ute and the four-door? Yes, as you can see already this lap, missing quite a few braking zones, kicking up quite a lot of tyre smoke from the rear end, and just all in all, not really driving very easily, as getting a big drift out of the alternate chicane. So yeah, we'll jump straight into the comparisons of the Forza stats, where you can see just how different these cars are. This car's got 6.9 for top speed compared to the Skyline's 6.4. So the Mercedes was hitting about 153 miles an hour going into turn 1 into 130R, which is just a little bit better than average. But after driving the Skyline, it was really fast. And in terms of the acceleration to match, it was 8.4 compared to the Skyline's 8.2, which might not seem quite so much of a difference, but you could really feel it when driving the car. Although the main thing you could see, as I go flying off there, is the brakes. I could not get used to having bad brakes. And when I say bad brakes, I mean the stat is 5.8, which for this series is probably average. It's certainly not a bad stat by an A-class car standards. But after driving the 6.3 braking in the Skyline, it just felt like they were milk bottle brakes. Is it milk bottle tops? I think there's some sort of saying for bad brakes about milk bottle tops or something. I completely butchered it. But so yeah, this car 5.7 handling as the last stat compared to the Skyline 6.3. So just as I said at the start, it doesn't really handle... Well, the thing is it does. 5.7 handling is still a very good stat. This is still a very good handling car in isolation and compared to perhaps some speed builds that I might do later on in the series. But, or just in general speed builds in A-Class. But compared to, like in this episode, I keep comparing it to the Nismo, which had grip for days. So yeah, it's a little bit more of a handful. And that's partly due to the fact that this has got 510 horsepower, which is just over 100 more than the Skyline. It's got 560 foot-pounds of torque, which is nearly 100 more than the Skyline. But it does weigh nearly 3,600 pounds. So, although in this episode I'm comparing it to the Skyline, as I said, it's very comparable to the two HSVs that went near the start of the series. In terms of tyres, this has got the same 265s on the front that the Nismo had, but with all of its more power, it's actually got skinnier rears. It's gone up to 305s on the rears, which is still a decent sized tyre. But dealing with 510 horsepower on skinnier rear tyres than the Skyline's 404 horsepower with wider tyres, it's quite a difference. So, yeah. Although I love the Mercedes, it's rather tricky to drive, as you can see there, just missing another braking zone and going very wide. The Skyline was very easy to start driving, but very difficult to start driving fast. This was just difficult to drive, in comparison at least. So yeah, it was rather interesting. So as we come up to finish the last lap of the introduction to the Mercedes... Oh, actually, one more thing I want to say is I was very happy to see that the sort of DTM aero kit, or the Black Series aero kit, gave it adjustable aero. So although it might not have the normal Forza stuff on the front and rear, that is actually full race adjustable aero, which I was very fond of. But anyway, that is it. That's the introduction done for the Mercedes. So let's move on to the head-to-head best lap comparisons. So, starting the lap with both cars, it should be really interesting to see how these compare, considering just how different they are. And already, you can see the Mercedes flying into a lead down the straight into the first corner, but the Nismo carrying so much corner speed. I think it's almost caught up that gap already. Maybe a little bit. I think the Mercedes is still slightly ahead, going through two very slow corners where the Nismo should be a little bit quicker. But on the exit, they look pretty even already. Crikey, the Nismo has pulled back that straight line speed advantage. But going into another couple of corners again is where the Nismo should shine. Just being able to carry that little bit more, well, probably quite a bit more corner speed. But that's once again on the exit. The Mercedes has just got that acceleration where it can try and keep up or claw its way back. I think the Nismo is slightly ahead at this point. So the Mercedes, after shooting into a flying lead, has seemingly gradually dropped back. Another acceleration zone for the Mercedes, but then it's another braking zone. Both cars pretty neat and tidy through the alternate chicane there, with the Mercedes laying down a lot of tyre smoke throughout this lap, and once again on the exit of that corner. And quite another high-speed section, long right-hander. Mercedes perhaps pulling it back a little bit again, but then we're going into Spoon. Once again, it's the Nismo having the advantage, and that is quite a gap that it's managed to pull through Spoon. And then how far down is the finish line? Can the grunt of the Mercedes pull it back? Who's going to cross the line first? I think it's going to be the R33 Skyline. Or I think it might have just about been the Skyline. So let's go and have a look at the Skyline's time first. It was a 1:27.506, which unfortunately puts it bottom of the table so far. So how did the Mercedes compare? Okay, now that takes the bottom of the table. The Nismo Skyline was only there very briefly. Quite close between the two cars though, less than 0.3 of a second. Although compared to the rest of the field, rather disappointing, I must say. I think I let both of these cars down a little bit though. I think I gave the Nismo too much grip for it to really be able to put in a lap time. Just lost too much down the straights, and vice versa for the Mercedes. I think it was one of the quickest so far in a straight line, and it just didn't have the grip. So I hold my hands up. The cars weren't built particularly well, and that's why they're bottom of the table. So that is it for this episode, guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon for the next one. Goodbye.